Well, this is bad news, especially if you're an AI enthusiast. And that is that Starbucks just recently announced, just days ago, that they are pulling the plug on their AI tool after it being operational for just 9 months. Now, they rolled this system out back in the fall of 2025 to 11,000 different stores. And the whole idea here is that the software, the technology, the AI tools would help manage inventory. It would help manage staffing, so scheduling staff during peak times and whatnot. It was supposed to provide better customer experience and allow the baristas and the employees to be able to spend more time with customers rather than doing some of the more manual stuff. But that's not what happened. That's not how things unfolded here. What ended up happening is that customers experienced longer waits. They had operational bottlenecks. Service quality went down. The AI inventory tools miscounted products and mislabeled items, which caused operational confusion and operational inventory issues. The scheduling algorithms created unpredictable staffing and understaffed the stores during some of the busiest periods. And the employees complained that the systems ignored real world store conditions and human judgment. That was a really interesting point that I saw in one of the articles as I was researching this topic, is that the employees were complaining about the technology. And I'm sure there's a lot of truth to this. I'm sure, and I would suspect that the AI did not do a great job of understanding real world conditions and not being able to handle human judgment the same way a human would. But I do wonder if underneath that is a bit of resistance to change. Maybe people were threatened by the AI tool because if the whole idea here, which it sounds like it was, if the whole idea was to reduce staffing level, to optimize staffing, that's code for we're reducing people's hours. We're going to spend less money on labor, maybe more time or more money on technology. So if that's the case, then of course, your average frontline employee that has a lot to lose by an AI tool like this, they might push back a little bit harder. They might be more critical. They might be more sensitive to an AI tool. So it's just a good reminder that there's just a lot of lessons here. And it's a good reminder that even though AI is super powerful, it could do so many different things, it still is not the easy button. It's not the silver bullet that a lot of executives are looking for. And, the good news, bad news in all of this is that some of these lessons from this case study, being super recent, just very fresh off the press, some of the lessons here are things that have been relevant for decades now. I mean, since I started my career, it's been a lot of the same things we've been talking about. But I think the temptation, the appeal, the allure right now is that AI is different. AI is going to make things easier. AI is so much more powerful. We can roll out AI more quickly than we could roll out, say, a fully integrated end-to-end ERP system. So it's easy as a leader to say, well, AI is going to be different. Those human issues, those operational issues that organizations have struggled with for decades, that was different because the technology was different. Well, it's not different. In fact, if anything, AI is exposing more cracks in the foundation, exposing more issues as it relates to data, data readiness, organizational readiness. Resistance to change with AI is just phenomenally high. I think leaders are very enamored by and excited about technology when it comes to AI, but employees are the least excited about this sort of technology than I can recall at any point in my career. Employees never like change to begin with, just as a broad generalization. But when you talk about something as powerful and as disruptive as AI, they're going to push back even harder on it, regardless of how excited leadership might be. So a lot of good lessons here. And it makes you think, if Starbucks isn't able to make their AI rollout successful, given the size and scale of the company, the resources at their disposal, the fact that it is a pretty innovative, successful company, if they can't make their AI initiatives scale and succeed, then what does that mean for the average organization? That's what we're going to talk about here today in episode 276. We're going to talk a lot about AI leadership, the collision or the intersection between the human and operational dynamics versus the technology. There's a lot we're going to unpack here in episode 276 of Transformation Ground Control.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you.
3, 2, 1. control to Major Tom.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 276. My name is Eric Kimberling. This is the podcast that's tech agnostic, has everything to do with digital transformation, including people, process, technology, and strategy. We don't have vendor sales spin. We're not here to sugarcoat anything. We're just here to share the reality of what it's like to be inside ground control of a big digital transformation or any sort of change initiative. As I mentioned, my name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent tech agnostic consulting company that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And we just talked about the Starbucks AI failure case study to open up this episode. And that's a good backdrop for what we're going to talk about throughout the discussion here today. We're going to be talking with, later in the show, we'll be talking to Jim Koetting, who is a leadership speaker, author, consultant, and podcaster. He's going to be on the show talking about a few things. Mainly, he's going to be talking about the future and how the future is now as it relates to AI and leadership. So we're going to talk about the human side of AI and why leaders are failing and why things are breaking down when it comes to these AI initiatives. And again, looking at that Starbucks use case, that Starbucks case study, it's a perfect example of what happens when we have poor leadership, poor focus on organizational and operational components of a technology initiative, and we overinvest in the technology. I have no doubt that Starbucks, in that case study, by the way, I have no doubt they spent a ton of money on technology. I'd be curious to see how much time and money and energy they expended on the non-technical aspects of that project. And I would put money and bet money on the fact that it was probably overwhelmingly tilted towards heavy investment in technology, not much investment or not nearly enough investment in people and process. And I think that's where a lot of organizations are failing right now with their AI initiatives. And that's why some of the early indicators of AI success and failure are actually worse and less flattering than ERP failure rates were. ERP failure rates have historically been fairly well known and documented to be 70 to 80% plus. Some of the data that's coming out with AI failures is putting it even higher in the high 80s percentage. So it makes you think, well, if the technology is that much more sophisticated, how could we possibly be failing at a higher rate? And surely we've learned our lessons from decades and decades of trying to implement technology and failing along the way for many organizations. So we're going to talk about all that here today and try to really unpack and understand why that is. But I'm excited to have Jim on the show. It's the first time we've had him on. He's the author of a book called Hijacked, which is about distraction, dopamine, and leadership. And what's really interesting about him is he has a very interesting background. He's got sort of the way he talks and the way he writes is there's a heavy psychological component to what he talks about and how he writes about this stuff. And it's very relevant to leaders today, especially emerging leaders. I think, we're going to talk a lot about generational gaps and generational differences between different generations of leaders. Like I'm Gen X, for example. My leadership style, my generation as a generalization is going to look very different than baby boomers and certainly a lot different from millennials and Gen Z. So we're going to talk about some of the generational psychological aspects and how that relates to leadership and just the future of organizations. And we're doing that all in the context of AI initiatives. As we look at how to be successful leaders with AI or any sort of technology initiative, what is it that we need to know? So be sure to stick around for that. He's going to be a great guest to have on the show. I've been on his podcast recently, and I'm excited to have him on mine. So what I want to talk about too, in addition to what we've been talking about with Starbucks, another interesting topic that I've been really honing in on lately in the last few weeks, ever since SAP's big Sapphire conference, is I've been focusing on this autonomous enterprise hype cycle. Just a couple of weeks ago, SAP finished their Sapphire conferences both in Orlando and in Barcelona. They unveiled their vision for the autonomous enterprise, which is AI agents running business processes end to end, over 50 new Joule assistants, a new business AI platform. And it looks incredible. And some of it really is incredible. It's really cool what SAP is doing with AI and what they're doing to pull together their entire ecosystem of products. It is interesting to see. It feels like now SAP is starting to figure out how all these different pieces and these different acquisitions that they bought over the years. I feel like they're starting to crystallize a more complete and more comprehensive strategy with what their product roadmap is going to be. But there's a lot of talk about autonomous enterprise and really cool, sexy stuff if you're in a boardroom or maybe even a project war room. But I read this stuff and I try to think, well, what would I think if I heard this term autonomous enterprise and I'm an employee, and my executive comes back from Sapphire, my leaders come back from Sapphire and tell me, hey, good news, we're going to deploy this SAP tool, which is going to allow us to become an autonomous enterprise. Well, I can tell you right now, if I'm an employee, I do not like that idea at all because that sounds like you're eliminating my job. And so that's the one thing that really struck me. In addition to the cool technical innovation, I had a mixed feeling because I thought the technology was super cool, and I actually liked some of these announcements and the direction that SAP is taking some of the stuff. But it also made me think, man, that's such a big dichotomy between the coolness and the sexiness and the appeal of the technology and how the average employee, the average frontline worker is going to respond to this. I think those are two totally different things. And I think we're in for a bit of a bumpy ride, as we try to roll out these more advanced technologies, whether it's with SAP or any other vendor. And again, going back to the Starbucks example, they did not, I don't believe that was an SAP based AI tool that they rolled out. It was, I believe, a third party AI tool. But regardless, I mean, it doesn't matter what the technology was. It just goes to show that these projects are going to be very difficult. And here's a question that nobody at Sapphire seemed to be really asking or talking about, and that is, who leads the humans while the machines run the processes? We spend so much time in this industry talking about machines, machine learning, AI, automating processes, but how are we leading? How are we going to lead these people through these changes? Because these are massive changes we're talking about. I mean, you look at the way SAP talks about the autonomous enterprise. You look at how Starbucks looked at their AI tool and their vision for what AI would do. That's massive disruptive change to the workforce. And yes, let's just assume it could and probably is good for the organization longer term. Maybe it increases profitability or better customer service, better inventory management, all the things Starbucks was trying to accomplish. But if your employees aren't on board and you don't have that buy-in, that's where things get real dicey. So if your AI agents are going to handle procurement, finance, supply chain, et cetera, what are your people going to do? How do you lead them? How do you develop them? How do you keep them engaged in thinking when the machines are doing the doing? And that's a totally different thing now. You're talking about having AI do things that a lot of people have been doing manually for a long time. And yes, this is an opportunity to do less of that manual work and be more strategic. But you can't just tell an employee, be more strategic and do more strategic things, and somehow that's going to make everything okay. You need to define and clearly articulate and crystallize and document what exactly that person is going to be doing and what these different work groups are going to be doing, how their jobs are going to change, what exactly they're going to do with their leftover time or their time that's being automated or impacted by AI. All that stuff you have to do, or else these projects just won't succeed. And that's exactly what today's episode is all about. I'll have Jim Koetting, like I mentioned. He's a leadership coach, speaker, and author. He works with executives on something most of us are really terrible at, especially in today's day and age, and that is thinking deeply. So thinking deeply, not faster, doing smarter things, not necessarily just more things. So he actually wrote a paper that to me reads more like a fable about two different employees. One who gets fired because AI can outproduce him, and one who gets promoted because he developed judgment, empathy, and presence that the machines can't replicate. And so it's a really interesting fable. If you're a fan, one of the best books I've ever read in business, in my opinion, is The Goal by Eli Goldratt, I think it is. But it's called The Goal, and it's a fable. It's a story, but it's got a operational business operations leadership sort of theme to it. And so you learn a lot by reading it, but it's told in the form of a fictitious story, not academic, not, from the ivory tower of a boardroom. It's more frontline story. And that's sort of how this paper read. He sent me this paper or this fable about a week ago. And I read it, really liked it, and wanted to, we wanted to base the interview on that story. So he's going to unpack that with us a bit and talk about the dichotomy between these two characters in this story. And it's a good lesson in how judgment, empathy, nuance, presence, human judgment, all these things that humans or that machines will never be able to replicate, those are more important today than ever. And so if you've been binge watching episodes about SAP, cloud migrations, and vendor lock-in, This might be a bit of a palate cleanser that your brain needs, and it might be the most important episode we've done here in recent months. So stick around for that conversation with Jim, and let me know what you think about SAP's autonomous enterprise. And even if you're not specific to SAP, the software vendor's vision of fully automated businesses and enterprises, and the impact that AI has on organizations. What do you think how's this going to look? How do you see this playing out? I'd love to hear your predictions on how technology and AI is going to impact organizations going forward. There's an audience question of the week, though, I want to get to before we bring Jim on. And this is paraphrased from a recurring comment that I get on LinkedIn and YouTube. So I'm paraphrasing and consolidating into one question here, what's actually several questions across multiple people. So thank you to everyone who asked a question related to this, because there was enough commonality here that I thought it'd be worth unpacking. So the question is this: Eric, all this leadership and change management stuff sounds nice, but at the end of the day, these projects succeed or fail based on the technology and the budget. Soft skills don't ship product. Well, that's an interesting point. My knee-jerk reaction just is to say, I totally disagree. You're wrong. I'm right. I won't do that. I'll resist that temptation. I don't think you're wrong, by the way, necessarily. I just think there's a gray area here, a gray space that we need to dive into. And that, yes, you need the technology to work. It has to be a working product. But the problem is, companies, I see it all the time, organizations just try to bite off way more than they can chew. They buy all this technology, then they feel like they have to deploy it all because they already bought the software. They're already paying for it, so they feel like they need to deploy it. So the scope ends up becoming overwhelming to the organization. So then they end up cutting back and throttling back, and even then, they can't consume all this technology in a relatively short period. And so the myopic focus ends up being, let's just build a technology that works. And meanwhile, the organization and the operations are pushing back and resisting change. That stretches things out even more, which causes us to need to cut scope because we need to get this done within a reasonable time and budget. And then you might cut it so much that you're actually cutting some of the technical aspects too. They're important. So I sort of agree with you, but I think at the end of the day, though, it really is the people and the operations. The soft skills are the reason that 70% of projects fail, or maybe 80%, depending on which number you quote, in terms of the research. It's usually not the technology. The technology works. I honestly can't remember the last time the technology didn't, quote unquote, work. Now, it might not have worked for the business. It might not have been optimal, but it usually works. It's usually not broken, like completely broken. It just may be that it's not working for your business, which is a big deal. That's a really big deal. So I'm not trying to dismiss that concern. But I think that's the big challenge, is that it can work, but it can not work for your business. Those are two different things. So it can post transactions, it could run the reports, it could process invoices. But the reason projects fail is that leaders can't align their teams, they can't manage resistance, they can't make the hard decisions, and they can't think beyond the next sprint. And those are all the soft skills, and they're the hardest ones to develop. And now, in the paper that Jim's going to discuss here in just a few moments, there's a line in his paper that I really like. It says, when output becomes unlimited, judgment becomes priceless. And that's the world we're entering. When output becomes unlimited, judgment becomes priceless. You think about it now with AI, we can all create as much stuff as we want. We can write more, we can create more images, we can go to Claude and create a bunch of apps that may or may not have a purpose or meaning or place in this world, but whatever, we can do it. So with that now, knowledge, or not knowledge, but output is becoming somewhat of a commodity. Any one of us can create stuff. The fact that the thing that's becoming less common is judgment, the human capacity. And I do wonder if we're becoming a bit mentally lazy, with AI now. I know there's been times where I ask myself, am I being lazy right now just because I can use AI? And sometimes I have to force myself to sit down and write a LinkedIn post or write a blog or an article using my own words and my own fingers, rather than asking AI to base it on a video I did or whatever it is. So that's the world we're entering. AI can produce unlimited output, but the question is whether you leaders out there have the judgment to know what to do with it. So that's the gist of today's conversation. And one more thing, if you are looking to learn more about digital transformation success, how to make your AI initiatives successful, your ERP initiatives successful, whatever kind of technology you might be deploying, be sure to check out Digital Stratosphere 2026. It's coming up fast. It's September 9th through 11th in Denver, Colorado. It's an event that we sponsor. Third Stage Consulting. It's produced by Major Tom Productions, who is the same producer of this podcast, by the way. And all my YouTube videos are produced by Major Tom Productions as well. This event is produced and hosted by Major Tom Productions. We get vendors involved with it as well. So we try to bring in industry peers and colleagues. It's 3 days of no spin, vendor neutral conversations on ERP, AI, and digital transformation. Even though we have vendors there, we insist that all the content is very broad and tech agnostic. The vendors are there. They have booths. You can go talk to them. You can get all the sales pitches if you want them. But the content of the event itself is extremely tech agnostic. And if you want to learn more about it, just go to thirdstage-consulting.com/stratosphere. I'll include a QR code here on the screen as well as links below. So with that being said, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to bring Jim onto the show. We'll dive into this conversation to talk about leadership in the world of AI. We've got a lot more to cover. Stick around. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I'm Greg Benton. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer with Third Stage Consulting. And if you are embarking on your digital transformation journey or in the middle of that journey in 2026, you're going to want to see our digital transformation report. This latest edition really dives into a lot of the key trends that we're seeing in the marketplace and the ecosystem right now. It also highlights a number of the things that are happening with AI being an important component and integral part of the ERP systems that are leading the way right now. Also, the shift toward composable and best-of-breed cloud solutions is really accelerating the decline of monolithic ERP replacement. The opportunity to download the report is found at thirdstage-consulting.com. And you'll also find other tools that will help you in the initiatives and the business planning that you're doing for 2026. Don't leave phase zero without it. Reach out today.
I want to encourage you to read our Guide to Organizational Change Management. It's a free report or a free guide that we published. It's one that I actually wrote that talks about best practices and lessons learned as it relates to change management. So as you know, on this podcast, we cover a lot of stuff related to the human sides of change, organizational change management, including training, communications, org design, all kinds of stuff as it relates to change management. So if you're trying to learn more about change management or you're looking for more direction and ideas on how to get started on your change management strategy and your overall journey, be sure to check out this guide. You can read it by scanning the QR code on the screen in front of you or in the links below for this particular podcast episode. You can find a link to take you to the page that will allow you to register to go ahead and download that and read it for free. So be sure to check it out. It's the Guide to Organizational Change Management, written by yours truly. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think, and hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 276. My name is Eric Kimberling. And you can find new episodes of the show every Wednesday, transformationgroundcontrol.com. This is the only podcast I know of that's totally tech agnostic, no vendor spin, just here to give you the reality and the truth behind digital transformations. And this conversation we're going to have here with Jim Koetting is going to be, I'm really excited for this because it's so different than topics we've covered on this podcast before. We're not really going to talk much about technology, even though we are going to frame this as an AI and leadership potential issue. It really is more of a technology and leadership issue. It's more of a change and leadership issue. It's something that we could have had this conversation 10 years ago, 20 years ago. It still would have been relevant, but it's even more relevant here today, given where we're headed with the breakneck speed of change and technology advancements and AI and disruption to businesses. We talked about the Starbucks failure at the beginning of this podcast episode. So a lot of noise, a lot of chaos, a lot of confusion right now in this space. So we want to dive in here to this conversation based on a fable, a short story, essentially, that's very meaningful. It has a lot of depth to it, a lot of good lessons learned, but it's more of a fable or story and it's about two leaders that have very different outcomes. One is producing more, is using AI, is becoming more, just cranking out more output. That person actually loses their job, while the person that spends more time learning empathy and leadership and some of the more human-centered traits, that person gets promoted. And the contrast between, the contradiction, the sort of the contradiction there, the dichotomy between the stories of these two individuals is pretty telling. But I'm gonna let Jim, our host here, tell us more about the story as soon as he introduces himself. But to get there, Jim, thanks for being here today.
I'm excited to be here. I've been a big fan of yours as well, Eric.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, and it's good to get our minds together here on this topic. I know I was on your podcast not too long ago,
Yeah,
and good to have you here now. And now the tables have turned. Now I can put you on the hot seat and ask you all the tough questions that I know you love answering. But
absolutely.
I'm going to talk about this article you wrote that is related to this topic, and it sort of sets the baseline for the conversation here today. But before I get into some of the questions I've got, and I certainly would love to hear audience questions as well, because we are streaming live here today. Would love to hear just a little bit about your background and your backstory. What do you do?
So right now I do mostly speaking and writing. I do a lot of that. I have a podcast. I do more consulting on or auditing on leadership in organizations. So auditing and how do we transform leadership? How do we develop leaders in this age of AI where workflows are changing, leadership is different. If you train kind of the old way of leaders or you coach the old way, you're not taking into account that our workflows are changing so dramatically.
Right. Interesting. So you mentioned that you're an author, speaker.
Yeah.
You'd sent me this article that you wrote recently that I don't know if article is the right word. It's almost like a fable.
Yeah, it's a paper. And so one of the reasons why I was writing that is I'm working with some of the top leadership coaches, working with some of the top executives around the world. And we've come up with an idea to have a retreat, the Cayman Islands, south of France, just a very exclusive retreat. And we needed some prep work before that retreat. And what we're trying to do is get leaders to think more deeply. And the challenge is leaders want 3 bullet points in a close. Just get to the point. Just get to the point, Jim. I just need you to get to the point. Well, it's not using that part of the brain that's really, really important, using that prefrontal cortex. And your brain is designed to want to conserve energy. It doesn't want to use a lot of energy. And what I'm trying to do is get somebody to use a lot of energy. So I send out this several page document. And I said, I need you to read this. It's going to take 30 minutes to read. It's about 6,000 words. I don't want to read that. Just, can you give me the reader? No. The point is to read it. There's a lot of story in it. It's taking your brain and doing something in your brain that you're not used to having. But once you go through that, then you have a different way of looking at things. The best example I can give is Jeff Bezos outlawed PowerPoints because they're kind of lazy. You can get a lot of slop into bullet points. There's not a lot of thought that goes into that. And so what he does is he says, we're going to have our meeting. We have a 6-page memo, and it takes somebody time and revision to write this and rewrite it and craft a narrative, which is using a different part of the brain. Everyone sits in that meeting, they read the memo, and then they go to the discussion. And he says what he will do a lot of times is he'll go through and he'll read something and he goes, I have a question. I write it in the margin. By the time he gets down further in the memo, it's like, okay, that question's answered. If I'm getting up and presenting and I've got my PowerPoint slides up there and I've got a group of executives, a C-suite, a board or something that I'm presenting, all of a sudden somebody fire off a question. Well, what about this? I'm like, well, you're on page 5. I'm on page 2. You mind if we stay here? I'll get to that point. But now we've disrupted it. We've changed the thought, taken somebody's brain out of it. So the reason is to get that part of the brain activated that I really need activated, because I'm looking at thinking and judgment. And so our brains are wired for story. There's a whole story in it and there's context, but it's the same way I speak and I write. I've got to get that brain engaged in a way that helps bring out the best in somebody's thinking.
Yeah, yeah. So for those that haven't read the article, can you summarize it? I mean, it's maybe just summarize what it's about, without
Yeah.
obviously getting through
So
all the stuff.
basically, it's a story that starts off, and two people find themselves in this crazy situation. They have one is getting let go. He's extremely productive. The other one is getting promoted. And the person getting let go was talked to a couple years ago. They brought in a consultant, had a speaker, had a book, and it was about developing some soft skills about retraining the brain not to be so fragmented. And he just kind of put it off and just kind of went around on his way and just was really productive and output, where the other guy got a little deeper, could think a little bit more. They promoted him and they're letting the other guy go because the output that he could put out, he can't compete with AI in a lot of ways. The other guy built his leadership qualities. He built his communication. He built his self-awareness. He had a presence around people that helped them become more productive. He really grew internally as a person, where the other person's just like, let's just get it done. Let's get it done. Let's get it done. And that is not going to be as important, taking working the 12-hour days and trying to get this stuff done and just output, because sometimes the output is not what we need. We need discernment. We need to promote the right people. We need to think differently as leadership, because as our workflows change, that's something that is going to be a big issue in developing leaders. And so I wrote the article for that reason, and that gives it some context. It's a fascinating read, and I'm going to craft a book about it, or a short book or something about it, so it'll be out pretty soon.
So I want to stop here for a second on what Jim just said, because this isn't hypothetical. It's happening right now in every organization. You heard Jim say that Bill gets fired, Stan gets promoted, the two characters in the story. It's the same company. They have the same skills on paper, but what's the difference between these two? Why do they have such very distinct outcomes? And I think this is a very important lesson for all of us here. Bill was the guy that just gets it done. Fast output, long hours. He's responsive. He's available. He's always working. He's working hard. There's no doubt that he has a very strong work ethic. And that is and was every manager's dream employee 5 years ago. The problem is that AI can now do everything that Bill was rewarded for. So when you look at speed, volume, availability, responsiveness, just cranking out output, Bill's superpower suddenly became dispensable. It became a commodity overnight. So what did Stan do differently? Well, he invested differently. He got deeper, not faster. He developed judgment. He developed the ability to look at two options and know which one is right, even when the data doesn't give you a clear answer. And that's something that AI can't solve for you. It can always give you recommendations, but we as humans have to know when to override AI. And just like if you have an employee, if you're managing a team of 10 people, you might have 10 different opinions, and you as a leader have to decide which one you think is best for the business and for your work group. So that emotional IQ, I'd call it, is something that's very important, and that nuance is very important. And, the Stan was able to develop empathy, which was the ability to read a room and know who's struggling, who's checked out, who's looking like they're about to quit or just heavily demotivated. So he developed presence and the ability to walk into a meeting and make people feel safe enough to think clearly. And so it really is a contrast between a doer and a true leader. And I think that's what's missing in the world today across the board, but especially when it comes to big, complex change initiatives. The strongest leaders that I've ever worked with, for example, are the ones that actually know the least amount about technology. And I don't think that that's a coincidence. If I have a top 3 list in my head of the top 3 most effective executive sponsors I've ever worked with in my career, and all 3 of them come from non-technical environments. They're all operations people. They all have really strong leadership skills. And in all 3 cases, they'd be the first to admit that they don't know a lot about technology. In fact, to the point where some of them lacked a bit of confidence early on as the executive sponsor of a big technology change initiative because they didn't know enough about technology. And when I hear that now, it's music to my ears. If I have an executive sponsor that's from the business side, doesn't know much about technology, and they're the ones leading the project, I literally breathe a sigh of relief, because I think, good, because you understand the business. You're not going to get caught up in all the technical jargon and garbage that bogs down these projects. And you're going to be able to see clearly about what the business needs. You're a lot more likely to. And I don't want to be I don't want to be condescending at all to CIOs in the room, because I do appreciate and respect CIOs. But a lot of times CIOs come from a very deep technical background. They grew up in the tech space, and they tend to view the world more myopically through the technical lens, because that's what they were trained to do. That's how they advanced in their careers. That's how they got rewarded. So it's understandable, but you need that business perspective. You need that clear-eyed business perspective. So the lesson here for every leader that's listening is, if you're still being rewarded primarily for output, for speed, volume, hours worked, responding to emails at all hours of the night, you're building a career that AI is about to replace. The leaders who survive and thrive in this era are going to be the ones who develop the human capacities that machines can't replicate. So it's things like judgment, empathy, self-awareness, and the ability to develop other humans. So when output becomes unlimited, judgment becomes priceless. So you just want to invest accordingly and really look at how you're investing your time in resources and focus. Are you focusing in on things that AI is about to automate, or are you focusing it on things that help you build a better culture, build a better team, build a better organization? And chances are pretty high that it's not going to be by just simply doing stuff that's going to get you there. One thing that stands out is it seems like with AI, especially AI moving as fast as it is, it's a lot easier just to move fast and not think. I mean, I think we're getting into a mode, and I see it in myself sometimes too. I don't know about you. Like when I'm using AI, sometimes I feel like I have to ask myself, am I putting my thought into this? Like, am I using my brain here, or am I just using AI as a crutch here? And I think there's a tendency for leaders to perhaps move too quickly without thinking and without really slowing down to build some of these human capabilities. And are you seeing that as well?
Yeah,
or is that?
I think that's really important. A lot of people get really excited about AI. So I'll have somebody make an app on Riplet, and they're like, "Oh, let me show you this. You understand a lot about software." And I've done a lot of software development. I mean, I've flown over to India, built whole teams over there, done international things, worked on multi-million dollar projects, and I understand all of the complexities and front end and back end and flat database and, massive database projects and doing all this stuff. And so when I see somebody who brings a Riplet app to me, I'll say, well, this is great. I said, show me how it works. And they'll go, well, it just does it. Oh, it has a problem there. I said, well, show me the back end. What do you mean the back end? I said, well, the back end, show me the login. Are you using Auth0? What kind of database are we using? We're using a SQL, non-SQL. Tell me about the database. Well, I don't know about this. It just built it. And I'm like, well, there's more to it. We're going to have some challenges, and I'm sure this is SOC 2 compliant, right? What's SOC 2? It's just
Right.
People get excited. See, it does this, and this. And I said, there's more to it. And then I'll start asking questions. I'll say, do this, and it breaks, and it breaks, and it breaks. And it's like, well, I just got to work this out. And I said, well, there's more to it. There's a little more to it than what you're thinking. And the problem is they don't have that judgment to see that. And if I look at somebody who sends me a good writing, I used AI to come up with this. I said, great. This is really a great start, but you're not thinking from how this is going to, you're not being empathetic to your audience who's reading this, who is using this, who's watching you speak, who's going through the PowerPoint. I can kick out things really, really fast. Are they good? Are they right? Am I going to build something or am I going to perfect something that I shouldn't be building?
Right.
Exactly.
What's the problem you're trying to solve? That's the other thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of that. I mean, people just creating stuff, which is kind of cool on one hand, because you think, all right, in some ways, I think AI might be unleashing the creative spirit, human creative spirit. But on the other hand, how do you keep it from becoming too mechanical? Like, just because you can create a bunch of more content, a bunch more output now, doesn't necessarily mean it's better.
Yeah. And I encourage people to start, using it, because, you've got to be in the 4th grade band before you're in the symphony, and right. You've got to struggle through things to figure it out. And the things that we think we're great on AI right now, we'll look back a year from now and say, man, I was an idiot. This is such slop. you know.
Such primitive technology compared to what we'll have someday.
Yeah, because
So
we appreciate the nuances.
yeah, absolutely. And you were starting to talk about, so when you describe the paper, and again, I hesitate to call it a paper. I don't know what to call it. It's very unique. It's a very unique piece of work, and I look forward to the book once you publish it. Um, but in the article, you talk about how the company didn't replace Bill with AI, it replaced him with a different kind of person. And you started to talk about this a few moments ago. So the type of person that could build empathy, that could handle some of the nuances and some of the more human aspects. Why is that a distinction that most executives are missing right now? I mean, why is that so difficult, do you think, for executives to address?
Well, you think about leadership from an aspect of influence. If if you have a great leader, a lot of times people have a diagnosis of a leader or what a great leader is and what leadership is. And there's a lot of books out there, for example, on great leaders, whether they're Navy SEALs or military generals or football coaches and things of that nature. But I always go back to leadership is more of developing people. So my favorite leader would be a guy by the name of George Martin. And for people who don't know, George Martin was known as the fifth Beatle.
Oh,
When the
producer.
Beatles started, they weren't very good. They had really bad instruments. They were turned down from everyone in town. George had to say, your drummer can't keep time. We can't record with him. So they had to get rid of Pete Best. They brought in Ringo Starr. But George still didn't trust Ringo, had the studio musician for the first song. Ringo just played the tambourines. And none of the Beatles could even read music. And so what George Martin did was brilliant. He developed these guys to one of the most influential bands out there. But he started with some raw talent that wasn't developed. And leaders need to think like this, and AI can't do that. And I want a leader that can develop people, get them to that next level. I can't just give them an AI and say, here you go. I need you to think of leadership like learning a musical instrument. It's something you can't do at a weekend seminar. It takes consistent training and then behavior changing and a lot of self-awareness. And we're not going to get that from AI. AI can get us things really fast and get that out there. So the people who start developing those skills and can transfer those skills to other people become really valuable in the marketplace. You think about communication is a very, very important thing with leadership. A lot of times in software development, the user story is very important as far as when you're building software, what's that user story? And a lot of people will not craft a very good user story because they don't know how to communicate very well. Well, think about leading an agent, for example, an AI agent, or building that agent, or how do you lead that agent? It's all about communication. How do you communicate better? How do you get deeper thoughts out of your head into another person, another agent? It's a skill set that's not been developed, and we're struggling with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. And especially if continuing with when you mentioned George Martin, I was like, oh, like the producer guy. I thought you were going to say someone else or just coincidentally same name, but that's interesting that's who you're actually referring to. And I didn't know that
Yeah.
backstory.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that you've got these two guys who are widely, with John Lennon and Paul McCartney, who are widely viewed as perhaps the best songwriting duo in history, in rock and roll history. And you think about that, like they didn't have AI, they didn't have half the technology we have now to produce or to create music, but yet they still have created some of the most enduring music in history. And I think that goes to a lot of what you're talking about here. It's creativity, it's the human spirit. It's not the technical aspect. Sounds like it didn't really matter that much. I mean, George Martin helped him clean it up, it sounds like, but
and there's another aspect to that where George Martin said, look, Paul and John had each other to play off of. They were always going back and forth and showing songs back and forth, but he saw real talent in George Harrison.
Yeah.
But George was kind of a late bloomer is songwriting because he didn't have that tension, that Paul and John had, constantly throwing things. Well, I like it, I don't like it, and John was very critical of a lot of Paul's music, and that was something that I think really um, spurned Paul on. There was a competitive spirit, and George knew how to use that. He knew how to bring in and get some of the greatest music out of George Harrison.
Yeah. Yeah. And then once the Beatles break up, he puts out that massive epic album, the All Things Must Pass, that was it
Yeah.
like three records full of music, just a creative outburst after the Beatles split.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, really interesting. I want to say hello to some people in the audience that are chiming in. Ken Hamilton here from Cary, North Carolina. Hello again, Ken. Thanks for being here again. Sanjay, hello, Eric. Good morning. And then someone on LinkedIn says idea to requirement specs to architecture to implement, confirm, loop as required. So I'd be interested to know what that person's thoughts, even though I don't see the name there, that person's thoughts on where the human factors in. What is the key role that leadership and humans in play in that as well. So getting back to the themes here in this article, Jim, for decades, organizations have rewarded speed and responsiveness, availability, endurance, and those are the exact traits that made Bill feel valuable. And Bill is one of the characters in your paper.
Yeah.
But how did business as status become so deeply, or busyness as status become so deeply wired into corporate culture, and why is that a problem now?
Well, one, getting things done, it's always really nice. I mean, if you're leading a team and you've got the guy that can just get stuff done, you just love that guy, and you praise him, you reward him, thank him and thank him. And so now he's in this area where I get rewarded for getting stuff done quickly. And then what happens is you start getting stuff done quickly and it's not the quality, or we were ideating about something, and a lot of times great leaders who are visionary thinkers process things by talking out loud. And so you have somebody who says, here, I came up and did that. I'm like, whoa, we've gone past that. We were just talking about this. You went and did this. And so is this provisional? Is this a plan? Is this a promise? Where are we in there? And that leader should have better communicated to that person getting things done. It's like, look, we're just spitballing here. We're just trying to ideate. There's nothing that we need to have done right now. Help me spitball. But having that self-awareness to explain that to the guy that's producing is something that we need in leadership, because the person getting the stuff out, he's getting rewarded psychologically, because you've praised him and patted him on the back as a leader for getting things done quickly. And now we're needing people not to get things done so quickly. We need to think about, are we building the right product? Think of the waterfall method versus agile. We've started thinking about, let's put something out that the customer can use and see how they're going to use that. And I think that's something that is a little bit different. I see a lot of companies that say, oh yeah, we're using SAFe and agile and doing all this development. And they're actually doing waterfall. They're not doing that. So it's very interesting to see from a leadership perspective, how do you develop that judgment? How do you develop the quality of leadership that requires deep thinking? And that's the challenge. We're looking for fast output, which AI is going to win a lot of times in the fast output. But discernment, we just really need people to have better discernment. And that takes time to develop that prefrontal cortex, to go through those mental exercises.
Yeah. Totally makes sense. And Mohammed on LinkedIn has a good follow-up question to piggyback on what you just said, Jim.
Yep.
Mohammed says, insightful discussion. AI may process information faster, but leadership still needs judgment, ethics, empathy, and contextual understanding. These are human responsibilities, not machine functions.
Yeah, you can have two leaders walk into a room. You have two meetings, and one leader walks into a room, and people tighten up. There is a lot of fear and intimidation. The creative thinking goes away. It just really tightens that room. And this leader doesn't have the self-awareness to understand what he's doing to that room. Another leader walks in the room, everyone opens up, they feel safe, they want to share their ideas. It can be really challenging. I've been in situations where I've been in an environment where every idea, I can't even get a word in edgewise because the leader has already decided what's gonna happen. He says, "Yeah, I won't have an open discussion, but I'm gonna make the decision anyway." And he doesn't hear from voices he really needs to hear from. And this is discernment that he needs to develop, that AI is not going to help him with.
So when you're working with your different clients that you speak with, work with in these workshops, how big is this problem? Like, how common is it that you see that lack of discernment, that lack of empathy, the lack of all the human traits that you're talking about here? Is it pretty common to not have that in a
Huge,
leader?
huge,
Yeah.
huge. And a lot of times people get promoted. When you start thinking of leader, I will have a group and I'll pass out a card, a 3x5 card, and I'll get everyone to define what leadership is and what a leader is. And you know what? We get a lot of different definitions of what leadership is. And so a lot of times people don't understand even what a leader is. And they think that I need to manage people. And usually you manage projects, you manage things, but you lead people. And there's a difference in that. And so actually defining what a leader is and what the role that they're supposed to be doing is difficult, and I go back to that George Martin. He's a great leader because the output from the Beatles was not just speedy, but the quality was there, and he developed them and they got more depth and the songs got better and better and better. And that's what you're wanting from a leader, not just an output.
I'm here with Jim Koetting. We're talking about AI and leadership and the intersection between the two and what leaders need to know in today's AI world. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I met her in a club down in Old Soho where you drink champagne and it tastes like Coca-Cola. C-O-L-A.
If you only attend one event this year, make it Digital Stratosphere 2026. It's our annual flagship conference. It's going to be September 9th through 11th in Denver, Colorado, the same location as we held it last year. It's 3 days where digital leaders, ERP practitioners, and transformation experts come together for no-spin, vendor-neutral conversations on ERP, AI, and digital transformation. There's no marketing fluff. There's no pay-to-play sponsorships, just real practitioners sharing real lessons. Go to thirdstage-consulting.com/stratosphere to learn more and register. Tickets are limited, and these always sell out, and I'd love to see you there. Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode 276. My name is Eric Kimberlane with Third Stage Consulting. You can find new episodes of the show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. And I'm here with Jim Koetting. We're talking about leadership in an AI-driven world. What do you think? What's the root cause of this problem? Is it because, we fall into leadership positions because we're good at our craft on the technical aspect, so that brings us up the corporate ladder, and suddenly we wake up and we're leaders? Or, what is it why is this such a big problem?
Well, it's a challenge. So somebody, it's kind of the Peter effect where you promote to incompetence. There's a person that was a great salesperson. Now let me put him to sales management, and he can't manage a sales team to save his life because he thinks that everyone should see the world the way that he does, or she thinks everyone should see the world the way she does. And our brains are wired differently. They think differently. The other challenge that you have is our brains are wired to conserve energy. We want to conserve energy, and we want give me 3 points in a close. Come on, I've got the next thing that I get onto, and I got the next thing to get onto. And Tom Watson from IBM many, many years ago came up with a idea or a slogan, and you know what that is, right? Think. IBM was think, and he saw this problem back in the day, before AI, before we had all this technology could do things. People just didn't think and took time to think. There's a great book out there by Keith Cunningham. It's called The Road Less Stupid.
Hmm.
Brilliant guy, but he talks about thinking time and sitting down and getting 3 meaty questions and sitting with your phone turned off and every distraction turned off and sitting for 45 minutes working on these meaty questions. And I will sit with executives and I'll say, just do this once. It's a game changer. That prefrontal cortex. I mean, your brain is so powerful, but we don't use it. We don't use it.
Yeah.
We want the shortcut.
Yeah. And the speed. And again, the world and technology changing so fast now, I imagine this becomes more pronounced of a problem as time goes on. Yeah. Very interesting. You write in the article that when output becomes unlimited, judgment becomes priceless.
Yeah.
What does developed judgment actually look like in a leader, and how do you tell it apart from just basic confidence, charisma, or seniority?
Well, it's discernment. You can look at 2 things. People have, I think, a lot of people have beliefs, and they don't have the self-examination to look at where their beliefs come from. How do you know what you know? It's called being epistemologically self-aware. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. So how do you know what you know? One of the things that people will be convinced of is some belief that they have, but there's no depth in that. So to give an example for myself, so I'm somebody who is, I live a sober life. I've been sober for 36 years, clean and sober. Now, I was a drug addict and an alcoholic. And one of the belief systems that I had was I don't have a problem. I don't have a problem. I know that 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 I don't have a problem. I don't have a problem. My other people might have a problem with my drinking, but I don't have a problem.
Right.
And I couldn't maintain a job, couldn't maintain a relationship, couldn't maintain, a lot of things, But the realization was I had this belief that was a false belief. And then all of a sudden there was a crack in that thinking and I changed my belief and I became better at something. And so when you start looking at people, they have a belief about themselves that is not the belief that others see in them. And so they don't understand what it's like to be on the other side of them. And it's a challenge because they have a lens in which they see things through, but they really need to adjust those lenses to get a better perspective. And they also need a mirror to look at themselves. And so a lot of times the self-examination and the judgment comes from examining your beliefs, examining how you see the world, examining how you think about leadership, examining how you think about communication, and examining how you think about influencing others. And it's a challenge that we're just not deep thinkers. We're not thinking through this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and speaking of thinking through this stuff, I mean, one of the characters in the article is Stan, and Stan didn't get smarter; he got deeper, which is sort of along the lines of what you're talking about here. What were some of the specific practices that changed him, and which one do you think matters most for leaders that are trying this out here today?
Well, leaders have created an environment to where it fragments. It's very fragmenting of the brain. And we also have other things like social media and the phones and everything that's fragmenting the brain. And so Stan figures out that his brain is fragmented. And so he starts going through and thinking about, gosh, I spend a lot of screen time. I'm on the screen quite a bit. If you look at an average 20-year-old, they spend 3 hours a day on reels. Their brain's just going.
Yeah.
And so their thinking is fragmented. And so Stan goes through and he starts substituting some of that screen time and some of that fragmenting thinking for reading, because it uses a different part of the brain. I know everyone, I love Audible and I like listening to books and I like going through that, but there's a whole different part of the brain that you use when you actually read. And when you read on paper versus when you read on screen, it actually uses a different part of the brain too. It's fascinating. But reading, getting out, going for a walk with no iPod, nothing in your ears, and having that thinking time is really, really important. Exercise, getting that brain, getting the blood flowing is very healthy for the brain. And so I think about getting the brain healthy, and that's what Stan was doing. He was getting his brain healthy that it could handle more. And so there's a presence about Stan that it was like when you went into a room with Stan, he's I'm in the room with Stan. He's a peaceful guy. I feel peaceful around Stan. He just, I can relax. I can put my things down. That cortisol drops in my brain. I can now think like I couldn't before. Where Bill, he comes to the room and he's like, get this stuff done. Get this stuff done. Where are you at on this? Where are you at on this? Where are you at on this? And he doesn't say, hey, how was your weekend? How are things going? What's up with you? Oh, your dog died? Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah.
He didn't have that presence. So if that helps, it's just being, becoming differently and having the discipline to not have your brain fragmented all the time.
Yeah. And it's so easy to be fragmented. Like you mentioned, the reels, the kids watching reels, and I'm not a kid, but I still spend probably too much time on reels or TikTok or whatever, but stuff that's a bit mindless that makes my brain even more fragmented. So I think it's a challenge for a lot of us.
And I love a good TikTok video. I love a good funny video. There's good entertainment. I love a good movie. But when I could say I like chocolate cake, but if I eat it all day, I'm not going to be very, very healthy. And that's kind of why I wrote the book Hijacked is because I think this is the biggest leadership challenge that we face right now is a distracted workplace.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because I have two teenage sons. They're 17 and 19, and they both have this allergic reaction to sitting down to watch a movie. Like they might be
Yeah.
able to sit down and watch a 20 or 30-minute episode of a show. But if you ask them to commit to like an hour and a half, 2 hour movie, even if it's something that is interesting, an interesting topic to them, it's really hard. And it's just like, they just can't imagine sitting there for 2 hours to watch a movie. And it makes me wonder now that you're talking, it's like, how is this whole generation going to react to the need to be deeper thinking, or to stop and think, stop and slow down? How are they going to react to that?
This is a brilliant point. And so when you start thinking of generational things, so I'm a Gen Xer. I grew up and come home before the streetlights come on. You're outside, you're playing, you're doing whatever you're doing. You're learning how to interact with people and resolve. You're running all over the neighborhood. And then the next generation who's coming in that I have to lead and develop, they were might have had helicopter parents. Their interactions were, through texting. They didn't have the ability to do that. So it's my responsibility as a leader to help these people grow into the people that they need to become. And part of that is helping them not be fragmented. And that's where I say, okay, I need you to sit down. I need you to read this for 30 minutes. Like, oh, man, they get all frustrated, but I've got to retrain that brain to get them to start thinking deeper. It's once you start appreciating thinking time, it's a joy. If you can sit there for, 30 minutes thinking about something and processing something, it's great. You ever heard when people come up with these great ideas? Why is this always in the shower? I come up with these great ideas in the shower.
Right.
Because you have no electronics around you.
Right. You're not distracted.
You're not distracted.
Yeah. That's sort of the value of camping or meditating. You think of all the things you could be doing in life to disconnect, or just to not shut your brain off, but just cut off the distractions, I guess you'd say.
Right. And we all have situations where we'll sit across from somebody and we can't have a conversation. I mean, that itch to grab the phone, what's going on? I'm like, just turn it off. Have a day that you just don't watch the phone. Have a couple hours where you turn that phone off,
Yeah.
to where you can get away from the screen. And we have to be on screens because this is what we're doing all the time. But we're on a screen now. I'm using it to get work done, but I've got to have that connection. And if I don't, what happens is I have this anxiety. I have a feeling of not okay. My peace gets robbed. It's difficult to be around me. And then I'll say, well, I'll have a cocktail after work and relax that way. The 20% of kids now, I guess Gen Z, there was a study that's saying, I think it was in England. The study was 20% of them were using cannabis on the job,
Wow.
using edibles. And it's like, okay, if you really want to take your thinking down, that's
one
the
way
way
to
to do it. But
Yeah.
the irony is they're using that to combat stress, and it creates more stress.
Yeah. Yeah. I know, for me personally, there's a day a few months ago, I forgot my phone at home, and, my immediate thought was, oh man, I need to run home and get it, because I only live like 7 or 8 minutes from
Mhm.
the office here. And then I realized, actually, this is amazing. By the end of the day, I loved it. I was like, I love not having my phone, because
Yeah,
like I
absolutely.
don't I don't have it's just a constant nagging worry, like
Mhm.
what's gonna pop up on my phone? Who's trying to get a hold of me, or what am I missing? And now it's like it doesn't matter what it is, because I don't know, and I have no way of knowing until I until I go home and look at my phone. So
Yeah, I've got this really fascinating friend, Seb, and he's got a manufacturing company, and he took the manufacturing company over, his family business, and he said, okay, I'm going to do things differently. Went all in on lean. And so they had about 5 minutes a day to work on improving processes and thinking. And all they could do is take 5 minutes, that little time. Now they have 3 hours a day, and they'll do tours of the company, and people will come by, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's incredible, because he's got the whole company thinking about, how do we do this better? How do we do this better? And they take thinking time, and it's really, really good. But to see them say, we'd get an order in 45 days, get it out, to now they get an order and they can have it out within 48 hours or 36 hours. And it's just incredible. But what happened is they started building a culture and an environment to where people are thinking, how do we
yeah,
do this better? And using this prefrontal cortex. Um, and when you have a culture like that, it's a much happier place. And when it's a happier place, your brain thinks better. And it's a self propelling betterment tool.
yeah. This is really interesting, because you're hitting on all these things that are sort of stirring up connections of patterns that you see in this industry. And even if we set aside, I know the topic here is AI. We're focused primarily on AI, but if we just back up and just look at the enterprise technology category as a
Yep.
whole, that's a
Mhm.
big thing right now, to invest in cloud, AI, ERP, whatever it is. And the whole industry focuses on using it, the whole industry focuses on selling by making sure you don't think too hard. You don't have to think hard. So what I
Mhm.
mean by that is, like, if you think about, like, if I look at the average ERP sales rep, like someone who's trying to sell software, a big SAP implementation to a big company, I'm going to sell them on that by convincing them that I've got pre-configured best practices. It's hosted in the cloud. You don't have to worry about it.
Mhm.
We're going to use an agile deployment methodology. You talked
Mhm.
about that a minute ago. I'm basically giving you a bunch of easy buttons. Like, you don't have to think. Don't think too hard. Just buy. Just implement. And then leaders fall into that trap even more aggressively, or more, a more difficult way. And I just think now that you talk about it in the context of how our brains work and how we don't want to think too hard, or how our brains are designed not to work too hard, it kind of makes sense. Like how, I'm not saying it's okay, or that we should just live with it or be okay with it, but I understand why it is that if I'm selling complex enterprise technology or transformation, I'm going to probably capitalize on the fact that you're not using your brain, and you may not stop to think, and you may not want to. So before we move on with more questions here, I want to share a contrarian view that connects everything Jim and I have been talking about to the world of digital transformation. And that is that the easy button is the most dangerous button. And it's one of the most dangerous temptations in a digital transformation project. Now, to frame this, think about how enterprise technology gets sold. Every pitch is designed to minimize your thinking, or to make you think that you won't have to work hard, you won't have to think hard, you won't have to make tough, messy, difficult decisions. So you think about some of the buzzwords that are used to sell software today, and to sell you on a dream of a big, massive, expensive digital transformation. Now, they can't lead with, well, this is going to be messy. You are going to have to work so hard. You're going to have to make difficult decisions. You're going to have a strong backbone as a leader. You're going to have a strong stomach as a leader. You're going to have to confront things you don't want to deal with. And at the end of it all, if you survive and aren't fired, or don't lose your mind along the way, you're going to be completely demoralized and tired. That's not a winning sales message. And I'm being a bit hyperbolic. That's not true for all CIOs, but a lot of CIOs, are put through the ringer during projects like these, or executives in general are put through the ringer. So what they do instead, and when I say they, I mean the software vendors, system integrators, implementers, they will sell you on this vision of pre-configured best practices, cloud hosted. You don't have to worry about anyone else hosting your technology. You don't have to worry about cybersecurity attacks because we'll handle that for you. Agile methodology gets to faster results, so we can start going fast. It's all about speed. And back to Jim's point, these projects do not need to be moving faster, despite the fact that they take longer than expected and cost more than expected. It's because we're setting unrealistic expectations. It's not that they're moving too slow necessarily. It's because we're setting unrealistic expectations. And yes, we are at times moving too slow because we as an organization are having trouble changing, or we haven't done the proper planning up front. But you look at it, so much of what the industry does is running counter to and really capitalizing on some of the thoughts and some of the things that Jim has pointed out. Now AI takes it to a whole nother level, because now it's with AI agents, AI just does everything. It just works, right? The agents are just going to do the work for you. And again, it sounds easy. What isn't a good selling point, and what isn't going to help me sell software, if I were a software sales rep, I'd probably be terrible at it, because I'd be too honest and too forthcoming. I'd never get any deals closed because people would not like what they heard. But when I think about AI, when executives hear that, they think that it's just going to be easy and it's just going to work. So in order to sell software, we've got to present the easy button. We've got to make the sound easy. We've got to downplay the risks. And every one of them is designed to make you not think too hard about what you're actually buying, what it's going to cost long term, what the risk is going to be, where the chaos and pitfalls are going to be, whether it's actually the right fit for your business. That's not the job of a sales rep, and that doesn't help them to do that. It would absolutely help you as a buyer, but it does not help them. Now, when you add Jim's insight on top of that, our brains are wired to conserve energy. He mentioned that a couple times, and I think that's super interesting. I just never thought of that. I wasn't aware that your brain was wired to conserve energy. So it makes sense that we want the easy button. We want the 3 bullet points in a close, like Jim said. We want the vendor to tell us the answer so we don't have to figure it out ourselves. We don't want to have to go through the messiness of figuring out how we're going to standardize our business processes, when we could just go clean core, fit to standard. Software is already built. Why reinvent the wheel? All these things feed into this easy button, this lack of thinking, this autopilot, this technology will solve all. It's all designed, and it plays into that human weakness. And we as leaders have to recognize that and move beyond that. So, everything Jim's talking about is a big, big part of why a majority of these projects fail, an overwhelming majority of these projects fail. It's not because the technology is bad, not because the vendors lie or the sales reps lie, but it's because leaders, they just didn't stop to think. They didn't challenge the assumptions. They didn't ask the hard questions. They didn't activate that part of the brain that Jim calls I think he called it the prefrontal cortex. This shows you how little I know about the psychological brain. But prefrontal cortex, he talked about, the part that does the judgment, the discernment, and the critical thinking. That's the part of the brain that is not being used enough. And by the way, as we talked about, that's becoming more of an issue as younger generations who grew up with fragmented brains and, social media, dopamine hits, short attention spans. This is going to become more pronounced of a problem as time goes on. And the vendors know it. The system integrators know it. The analysts know it. So this entire machine that I talk about in my book, Welcome to the Machine, It's built on the assumption that you won't work too hard. So my advice to you as leaders is be the leader who thinks too hard. Stop and think. Stop and ask questions. How bad is it going to hurt you to ask your vendor or system integrator some tough questions? Challenge their assumptions. Be professionally and healthily skeptical when you're dealing with your vendors. It's okay. It's your business. Do what you need to do. So be the one who thinks too hard. Be the one to ask the question nobody wants to hear. Be the one who says wait before spending tens of millions of dollars. Be the one that says wait. Let me understand what we're trying to accomplish first. That leader is rare, and in some of the best ones I've worked with, that was the other thing that they exhibited. They were able to stop and control and manage their vendors and not be led by and led astray by their vendors. And I'd say, gosh, I don't even know what the number is, but if I'd estimate, I'd say it's somewhere in the 70 to 90% of leaders that I interact with and that I come across on a day-to-day basis, they let the vendors lead them, or they did at one point let the vendors lead them, and then things didn't go well, and that's why they come to us and hire us. So, I might have a bit of a skewed data set just because we work with so many clients that have struggled, and then they come to us for help. But that is something that if you can just do that out front and not wait until you feel the consequences and just take ownership and ask those tough questions, be a strong leader. That's what Jim was describing when he talked about Stan in his story there. So the easy button is comfortable. The thinking is hard, but you're going to have to do the hard thing. And I can tell you too, having seen both sides of this, doing the hard thing early on is a lot easier and a lot less difficult than doing the hard stuff later when you've got to clean up a mess, because that's way harder. So might as well just get it right the first time and go through some short-term pain to get the long-term gain.
When the soul of the city was laid to rest, and the night's forgotten.
If you're about to embark on the jungle of digital transformation, check out my new book, Welcome to the Jungle. It's a book that just came out in late 2025. It's my second book, and it's a book that focuses on digital transformation failure case studies and talks about the lessons and takeaways from that. It's 300 pages packed of all the lessons and things that I've learned from having been an expert witness in lawsuits related to digital transformations, and also with our team helping clients recover some of their failed projects. I've included as many lessons as I could possibly fit into one book here. You can read this book. You can order it anywhere in the world in hard copy format, which is this format here. You can get it in paperback. You can also get it electronically as well. Scan the QR code right here or go to the links below for your copy. Hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode 276. My name is Eric Kimberling with Third Stage Consulting. You can find new episodes of the show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. And I'm here with Jim Ketting. We're talking about leadership in an AI driven world.
There are things that you don't want to use your brain. I mean, I want to go and take the shower. I want to hit the button and, have the hot water come out. I don't want to go build a fire or do anything else. I don't want to
Right.
think about that.
You
But
don't
there
want
are
to
things that,
go kill your lunch or anything like that. You
yeah,
want to just go to work.
I want things. There is going to be automation. There's going to be things that are AI and ERP systems are going to do that are just beautiful and wonderful, and it's great, and I love it. Now that it's doing that, I'm trying to get that so I can have that free time to do the thinking, the deep thinking, that I can make something even better. The other challenge is on ERP systems and everything else. It's getting the buy-in, and how do you get, there's so many great systems out there that people don't use to its fullest capacity. And they get used to the way that they use it. And this is how I love it. And you can do that with AI too. It's like, oh, ChatGPT is great. No, you try Claude. Claude's so much better. I said, well, Claude is great at this. ChatGPT is great at this. And how do you use them both together? Well, no,
Yeah.
Claude's great on everything. I said, it's not. ChatGPT will beat it in some areas, but it's a lot better on ChatGPT in other areas. But if you don't have the time to think about it, discern, play with it, and really think, you're not going to formulate that judgment and that discernment.
Yeah, that's super, super interesting. And I think, you look at social media's impact on our culture and how it affects our leadership. And I think you were alluding to this a few minutes ago. It's, think about how the algorithms work and how we're programmed to think. We're programmed to think either I'm going to give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. It's either good or bad. And, the algorithm's either going to feed me a video because it thinks I'm going to like it or it's not. Everything's sort of, everything's so calculated and black and white, and it's creating, I think, unfortunately, as the more you're talking about this, the more I'm thinking, actually, I think society is going to have more trouble with this longer term, especially as these generations grow up and become more increasingly at the leadership levels and the executive levels.
Yeah.
And I wonder how that's going to affect them because.
Yeah, I think one of the things, I worked with a manufacturing company a while back and increased their revenue by like 27% in a year. And one of the major projects that they said, well, to put these things out, it takes about 18 months. And I said, you can do it faster. No, we've been doing this forever. Jim, you're not in manufacturing. You don't know anything. And all these belief systems. And by the time we got done with the project, not only did they make it better, but they had a belief that they could do it within 6 months.
Wow.
They went from 18 months to 6 months because their beliefs changed. And as good leadership, how do you get the people to change and say, no, we're doing it this way? Because people hate change. I don't want change. I want to just consistently do the things that this was working so well. Well, I hate to tell you, things are going to change,
Right. Yeah. Is change becoming any easier for us as humans or as a culture, as a society, knowing that technology is changing at a breakneck speed? It's on that hockey stick exponential growth curve.
I think for some people, yes. For other people, no. Some people really have difficult change. And there's different personality types. That's one of the things I'll do a lot with leadership is understanding personalities. Now, the one that I like the best is the 5 voices. And I can put a link up there that anybody can do a free test, but it's Myers-Briggs on steroids. I know DISC, I know Enneagram, I know Myers-Briggs, all these different personality tests. The 5 voices is probably the gold standard out there right now. But there are people who thrive, love change. They want change. They're great at change. There are people who really, really struggle with that. And being that good leader is the ability to understand, okay, this person is going to have difficulty with change. I'm going to take a little more time with this person. I've got to get them from point A to point B. I can do it, but the communication, the nomenclature, all of the things that I'm going to work with this person on is going to be different than I would with this person who's like, yeah, give me change. I love change. Let's go. So that leadership, having that discernment of understanding who are the people, how do you have to work with them? I think that's really, really important.
Yeah. Super interesting. So LinkedIn, some comments coming in here. Yes, discernment. That's no small thing. It's a very big thing. I agree with that. Another person on LinkedIn. I apologize, I don't see the names here.
Sure.
Judgment, the most underrated skill. Great leadership can explain why and gain massive loyalty when it can be discussed, tweaked, or thrown away as new
Yep.
inputs arrive.
Hmm.
Interesting comment there.
Very good.
And then from Josh on LinkedIn says there's a book called Hooked by Nir Eyal that explains
Yep.
how all this stuff has been done intentionally. Kids' brains are constantly being targeted without them even knowing it. It's not as simple as telling them to stop. They are being this stuff and becoming addicted without even realizing it. Are you
Yeah.
familiar with that book? That book
Yeah.
Hooked?
Very familiar with it. And here's a better book that I think that you should get. It's called Hijacked. I know the author really, really well.
Oh, you know,
And
let me flip the. There you go. Flip that around. So
last weekend I did a big promotion. It was #1 in motivational business management, #1 in business leadership training, #1 in leadership. But what happens is if I want you to watch my video, if I want you to buy my product, if I do that through a story, and what I'm trying to do is it's a dopamine hit. I've got to give you dopamine. I've got to get dopamine in your head. And so everything is designed for dopamine, but your brain doesn't care where it gets its dopamine. It doesn't care. And so whatever's feeding the dopamine, those reels are going to keep coming and keep coming and keep coming. And there's fast dopamine and there's slow dopamine. Slow dopamine comes from reading a story, watching a movie. Fast dopamine is those reels, TikTok, TikTok, TikTok. And so what happens is you retrain your brain, and your brain's retrained. And as a leader, what we're trying to do is take some of these people and train their brain how it's supposed to be. And you have neuroplasticity. I mean, you can change. You can take somebody who's addicted to their screens, to whatever, and you can get them to change. It takes time, but a great leader can do that.
Right. Really interesting. I was not aware of the slow versus fast dopamine, but it makes total sense there.
Yeah.
Did you study psychology? I'm just curious. What did you study?
I studied a lot of psychology, but I'm more of an autodidact in that, and where I'm self-taught. But I'm not a psychiatrist, psychologist. I've just spent a lot of times, and from being 36 years in recovery, I've helped a lot of people in recovery. It's part of my recovery. So I work with a lot of addicts. It doesn't matter what they're addicted to. And mostly it's alcohol, mostly it's, drugs, but now it's prescription drugs and even the screens, and no one's immune. I'm not immune. I get sucked in every now and then, but I just have that agency to say, nope, not going to do this. We're going to put it down,
Yeah. Well, and it's an interesting reminder that, how prevalent these dopamine hits are. So we talk about addiction and things of that nature. It's not even just alcohol and drugs now. It's almost like we're creating other types of dopamine addictions.
Right. Right. And then when you don't have it, you have anxiety. And it's like, okay, I don't want the anxiety. How do I get the anxiety? Well, you can talk to a doctor and he's like, oh, here's 47 different pills that are going to fix your anxiety, or alcohol or weed or whatever you're going to do to fix your anxiety. But the challenge is it creates more anxiety. You've got to have that break. And then once you get out of that, and once you start having that leader that, has the agency to kind of get their mind back and everything else, being around those people is wonderful. You just feel peace, you feel joy, you feel love, you feel, I could be around this guy and I feel better. I can produce better quality product being around them. Just think of the Beatles, George Martin. They produced better quality product because he was a great leader.
Yeah. And they're, like you said, they're still creating a lot of it. Like the Beatles weren't taking 2 and 3 years between albums. They were cranking stuff out.
Yeah. Yeah. And, they kind of burnt, the Beatles eventually got to that burnout, and they talk a little bit about it. But when they said, okay, well, we're not going to go out and do the concerts anymore, we're going to do the studio stuff. I mean, that's when some of their greatest stuff came out.
Yeah. Is that like the White Album era? Is that like around there?
Yeah, White Album. I mean, you look at when they put out Rubber Soul and Revolver, those type of things, and competing with the Beach Boys. The Beach Boys would hear and say, "Oh, this is the greatest thing," and then the Beach Boys, would put out Pet Sounds, and the Beatles were like, "Oh my gosh, this is really good." And because they were just kind of pushing the envelope. How do we come up with something better? How do we do something different? And they were always testing and trying and doing things. And George was somebody who would give him the challenge and the support the way a good leader does. And some of the stuff he's like, the sitar stuff, he wasn't a big fan of George Martin's or George Harrison's, but he just kept challenging him and say, yeah, take it this way. And he was on 27 different songs, but he was the degreed musician who knew how to put those pieces together and help them.
Yeah. Super, super interesting. See, that's what this podcast is all about. It's not just about learning about technology. We also get a little bit of rock and roll history in here, get a little bit of psychology. I mean, we're mixing it all in here today. So I appreciate the divergent thinking that you're bringing to the table here. So this is a question from Third Stage Consulting. What do you think the most critical aspect of an implementation or ERP system that should always be managed by a human? Or what is the most critical aspect that should always be managed by a human? So if you look at a big transformation initiative, whether it's ERP, digital, AI, whatever it is, what do you think the most important human things, the most important human elements?
Well, I think, buy-in, to get buy-in, because you're going through a major change, and the change is difficult and more difficult for some people. And so you've got to address that as a leader and say, okay, we're going to do change. This is going to be better, but it's going to take some work. You're going to have to learn new things. We're not going to do things the way we've always done them. And so for a leader to help with that change is really, really important. And leaders can't do that if they're not self-aware and if they see everyone in the same lens that they see themselves. We process things differently. If you take the accountant and you say you're going to go into sales, and you say to the a salesperson you're going to go into accounting, they're just not wired that same way. The same with an engineer, and the marketing. There's the marketer is thinks differently than the engineer sometimes, and they are wired differently. They see change differently. They have that, and a leader's ability to help people become more self-aware, to help them have a mirror that they understand how the world views them and how they see a lens. That is so crucial in implementing technology, any technology, or going through a change. Change is constant. We're always going to have changing. And leaders have to be very gifted at helping people go through that change. That's a challenge. That's where we need that skill set.
Right. So if I'm a CEO, CIO, COO, or just any C-level leader or executive, they're listening to this discussion here today, and they want to do one thing for themselves and one thing for their leadership team to be better leaders and to cultivate more of a stronger leadership environment. What would that be? What are the key takeaways you could leave us with here today?
I want leaders to understand right now, executives are drowning in information, but they're starving for reflection. And story, if they can start thinking in story, their story, other people's story, it's a way of rewiring the brain. You're in a movie, you're in a story. Thinking that way is an easy step for that brain. I think that story is a way of communicating. It's a way of seeing the world. It's a way of thinking through things that takes you out of the current situation. Where are you in that story? And one of the formulas of story for a lot of leaders is they think they're the hero of the story, and they're not. Their people are the hero of the story. They're the guide. They're the Yoda. They're the Mr. Miyagi. They're the Obi-Wan Kenobi. They're that. And when they start trying to be the hero, the story falls apart. And so it's very important to understand story and understand that we're in this information overload, and we've got to go through and take time to reflect.
Be celebrated for it. But the leaders who succeeded, they thought of themselves as the guy. Their job wasn't to be brilliant. It was to make their people brilliant. And their job wasn't to have all the answers. It was to create an environment where the team could find the answers. And the job wasn't to be the star. It was to develop stars. In fact, Jim you just used three references I really liked. You talk about Yoda, Mr. Miyagi, Obi-Wan Kenobi, George Martin with the Beatles, which I did not see that one coming. That was a great one, by the way. I love the fact that we pulled George Martin, the Beatles, and rock and roll into our conversation today. Anytime we can pull in rock and roll, I'm going to be a fan of that. But it was really interesting. I did not know the story about George Martin and the Beatles. I know who George Martin is. I know his impact on the sound of the Beatles, but I didn't know all the trials and tribulations that he had to go through as a leader to make them a better band and make them who we all know them as today. And none of them were the hero. A lot of people, most of you have probably heard of the Beatles, but you haven't heard of George Martin. And that's by design. That's what a good leader does. None of these leaders that he mentions here were the hero. All of them were indispensable. And if you're leading a transformation right now, you have to ask yourself the honest question, am I trying to be the hero or am I developing heroes? Because the hero model doesn't scale. One person can't carry a multi-year, multi-million-dollar transformation, but a guide that develops a team of leaders across every function in every region, that's something that can be scaled. So be the guy, develop the heroes. That's the job. And that's a good way to look at it.
They're that. And when they start trying to be the hero, the story falls apart. And so it's very important to understand story and understand that we're in this information overload and we've got to go through and take time to reflect. It's so important.
Yeah. And I think that's, partially, setting everything from your daily routines to, I'm sure you've read, or I imagine you've read Atomic Habits.
Oh yeah. It's great.
Yeah. That's a good book.
Wonderful.
And that was helpful for me too, just to kind of look at what your routine is, how are you managing your time? How are you carving out time? I know sometimes I look at, and you probably have the same problem, Jim. You look at your calendar, especially coming off a holiday weekend like we are here in the US, look at your calendar, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm all backed up all day. Just boom, 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 boom. And I have to set aside, like I have to carve out time. Like I block out times in my calendar where it's like, there's nothing, you're not putting anything there. And I make it non-negotiable too. Someone will say, well, a client really wants to talk to you at that time. I'll say, no, it's the 2 hours of my thinking time, and
you got to have that. And, also coming home, that's one of the things that, I think is a challenge. Being a serial entrepreneur all my life, I would come home and be on the phone, and I just had to make I'm driving home. It's a great time to talk for me. I'm multitasking, but walking in the door, meeting the kids when they were younger and my wife and everything else, to be constantly on the business, it's like, what am I doing? So to have the discipline to say, okay, I've got to cut that off, get mentally prepared for where I'm at. I think that is so important. And the micro habits are so important from that book too. I can't teach somebody how to play the guitar at a weekend seminar.
Right.
If I'm going to do 15 minutes a day, if I do 2 minutes a day, James Cleary talked about, driving to the gym, just drive every day, be there. Eventually you'll go in. It's that start of that habit,
Yeah. Really interesting stuff. So how do people find your book, Hijacked? Where
I'll just go Google Jim Koetting and it'll pop up. Go to Amazon, it pops up. If you're in St. Louis, I'm doing a book signing in Barnes and Noble on the day before Father's Day. So great Father's Day gift.
Yeah, that's great stuff, Jim, and really appreciate you being here and sharing your insights. And I want to end with something, Jim, that you just said that I think every executive needs to hear, and that is you're drowning in information and you're starving for reflection. And, I'm just curious to know how many people here listening in have spent any time in the last, say, 3 to 5 business days. How much of your time have you spent just thinking, just working through issues in your brain, not scrolling emails, not taking calls, not, jumping on Zoom calls or Teams meetings, but just thinking, uninterrupted thinking through big issues, challenging issues, opportunities. I'm curious to hear, just drop in the comments. When is the last time you did that? Have you done it the last couple of days, the last few weeks, the last few months? Have you ever done it? Some of you may have never done it. I don't know. But I'd be curious to know about your last week. How many emails did you process? How many Slack messages did you get to? How many dashboards did you glance at? How many meetings did you go to? How many AI generated summaries did you skim? How many AI generated summaries did you create? And then how many of days, in contrast to that, how many minutes did you spend actually thinking, not reacting, not responding, not consuming, not reading, but just thinking through a hard question and working it through without interruption. I know I'm not as good at this as I wish I was. And it is something I try to be better at. And I do try to carve out time in my day to be uninterrupted, the door shut. I don't take calls, no matter how important someone thinks another meeting is. I don't interrupt that time because it is so important. And I try to do that at least a couple times a week throughout, twice in 1 week. And then, of course, I also have other stuff I block out, like my workouts, my daily workouts and things like that are non-negotiables. And all that stuff helps me, but I could still be a lot better at it. But if the answer is close to zero, that you haven't done much reflection, and I'd say for most executives it is, and maybe for a lot of you listening it is, then you have a problem that no technology is going to solve, because the quality of your decision is directly proportional to the quality of your thinking. And if the quality of your thinking is directly proportional to the time you invest in reflection, then you probably need to be doing more reflection. So here's a practical challenge that might help is this week, think about blocking 45 minutes on your calendar with no phone, no laptop, no interruptions. Just write down 3 of the hardest questions facing your business right now and just sit with them. Think through it. Don't Google the answers. Don't ask ChatGPT or AI. Just think. Jim, you mentioned Keith Cunningham, the author, and he calls it thinking time. And Jim calls it activating your prefrontal cortex. Tom Watson at IBM, who Jim talked about, just called it think. So whatever it is, whatever you want to call it, just think. Just think. And I think that's something too that I encourage executives to do, especially at the early stages, at the early planning stages of a digital transformation, because there is so much pressure and so much temptation to just do, especially once you've chosen the software, you've got a budget approved, your board of directors, your management team, they're all on board. So now there's pressure, just go. Let's get this done fast. Let's just jump right in. You've got your system integrator, your vendors who are chomping at the bit and are encouraging you to move fast because it's in their best interest for you to move fast. It's actually in their best interest for you to move a lot faster than you're capable of, because they benefit financially for you to move fast. You do not benefit by moving fast. I can assure you that by moving too fast early on, you're going to actually be moving a lot slower later, because it's a lot messier and timely to untangle the bad decisions that get made early on. So if you spend a little bit extra time thinking early in a project, and this goes beyond just, blocking out time in your calendar every couple of days, I'm talking here more about a strategic use of thinking. And that is before you get into your AI project, your ERP project, your digital transformation, your CRM, supply chain management project. Just take that time up front. And it might be weeks, it might be months, but take some time up front to get the plan right, work through the big challenges before the army of tech consultants show up, because that's when it gets real expensive. That's when every minute delay gets real expensive. And that's when the pressure to move faster gets even more immense, because now every day that goes by, you're paying an immense amount of money, and there's pressure for you to minimize the spend, when the best way to minimize the spend is to spend the time up front to get through these decisions and messiness before your vendor, before your system integrator shows up and starts billing you enormous amounts of money. So whether you do it daily, I'm not asking the question, I suppose it's more of a recommendation. I'd say doing it both daily and taking the time at appropriate moments in a project, in a transformation journey, to take the time and stop and reflect. That's something that's it's going to pay dividends. So thanks again to Jim for being here. Thanks for the great audience questions and discussion here. I really appreciate it. And you'll find new episodes of this show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. Be sure to go watch all the past episodes. You might have missed all 275 previous episodes are out there at transformationgroundcontrol.com. Go check it out. Hope you have a great week. Hope you enjoyed this episode, and look forward to seeing you next week on the next episode of Transformation Ground Control. Take care, everyone.